Now, so let's follow LegionDestroyer, see if he started his game. And, yeah, his opponent is exMOHAX. And I think that's how you say it. Somebody said you read these letters here in Cyrillic or Russian letters, Russian language. exMOHAX. I hope they weren't just trolling or mucking around. Always possible. So this is a slower match, so I might have time to finally log into Streamlabs and see if anyone's followed me that I didn't acknowledge before. And the last people to follow me were MA 1975, and no, that was a day or two ago. Alright, so this is now part of the Crazyhouse Team League, which is a 6-team Bulgarian letters, says Blunderbear, not Russian letters. Okay, are you serious? I don't know how to tell the difference between Russian and Bulgarian letters anyway. I just know that exMOHAX is wielding a Canadian flag, but I don't know about his background. So there are 6 boards, and this, I'm guessing it's a board 2 match. I'm assuming it's a board 2 match based on the ratings. So they'll play 2 games of 6 plus 6. And we've just jumped into the first one. So I'm just going to step back so we can see the opening d4, d5, and LegionDestroyer, the high-rated player, taking the black pieces in the first game. So an early knight e4, bishop h4. Some players will decide just to leave the bishop there and play e3 and retake with the knight. Queen d6. Not sure what I would do. It's a fairly unfamiliar position to me. I don't know whether a3 is necessary. I'd probably just go knight bd2 and then start thinking when my opponent goes queen b4 about whether I want to let him take on b2. Maybe it's not such a good idea after all. It's probably only a good idea if the bishop moves and then you got some rook b1 to follow, rook takes b7 and so on. So a3, okay, maybe it's a good move after all. Knight c6, e3, bishop g4, bishop e2, queen g6. So very original play from Legion. It's kind of like an improvement on the rook lift with a5 and rook a6, the rover. I wonder if we can make a name for this opening with the queen coming up and across to g6. Knight bd2, take queen takes knight back on e4, queen d1. Marlonk is in the game chat. He's saying queen d1, in his opinion, black is better. Well, it seems certainly that black has gained a bit of time in the last couple of moves, trading and then sticking the knight back on e4. Bishop takes, and knight at c4 with the last move. Blunderman says, technically called Cyrillic script, but if you're going to call it a country instead, it should be Bulgaria and not Russia. But do they use the same letters? Is it the same? Well, it's not the same language, but do they use the same letters? Same pronunciation, that's what I really mean. Knight at c4. Okay, white to play. Thank you, Hossein Rahimi, 86. Something passive like bishop at c1. He certainly doesn't want to do this. What else? Queen e2, knight takes b2, rook b1, but then there's a really annoying move like pawn at a2. Even pawn at c3, probably just good for black. So b3. We had something quite similar in the last series with Andrew Nakamura playing b6, and then the knight, Master 10's knight came backwards. So I wonder if Legion is going to jump into d2. Is it worthwhile? Knight cd2 does give white the option to trade a queen for 2 knights, and then not sure where the queen lands, but okay, knight c3 instead. Again, it gives the option to sack the queen. B takes, knight takes. But if bishop takes, there is a queen takes g2. If rook takes, then well, there are a number of ways to pick up an extra pawn, like queen takes c2. But then if you don't have a direct threat, then, well, c takes d5 could be... Even just castling looks pretty safe for the white king. So I'm not quite sure at this moment that black holds any advantage. So white has enough material. Yeah, okay, but castling, then you can play pawn at e2 and pick up another piece. Could you perhaps play bishop at d3? But then, what happens on queen at c3 check? Yeah, I don't know. I was expecting pawn at e2 there. But now this seems to me like a waste of a pawn, because now bishop g4, and then there's a threat on d7, and then pawn takes d5, c takes d5. So I did not like this move, pawn at e4 from Legion. So these two bishops keep the king very safe. The queen is locked out for the moment. They're talking about the origin of Cyrillic and, I don't know, what do you call it if it's not Cyrillic? Blunderman? What do you call it? Bulgarian? Bishop e7, last move played after c takes d5. Yeah, I think this is a good idea, dropping the pawn on d7. Just so black doesn't have a chance to castle. So take. And I guess just take another pawn on e6. Yeah, I don't know whether Legion's going to find a way past this bishop on g4. So normally, once you have a few knights in hand, all you need is a couple of moves like this. You have a square, and all of a sudden you just have endless checks. So I think it takes white two more moves. One here, a knight on e6, and then he's really in. He's in for good, and then it's going to be game over. So Legion, I mean, yeah, that's if a move like h5 in counter-attack, but Legion is going to have to defend some of these squares on f7 and e6 to survive. So I do think white has an overwhelming advantage. Legion is whispering in the chat. He says, now we think... he's talking about himself. We, the proverbial we, when he means I. We think. Very double-edged in my opinion. I wouldn't be surprised if I was dead lost from some mysterious mating idea. Well, don't think it's too mysterious what white's trying to do. Yeah, but after bishop takes e6, it's going to take white, I think, at least another two moves, because the main threat is probably promote, rook takes, knight at d7, rook takes, bishop takes, and then I still don't think black can really do much in counter-attack. It's another good idea, knight takes e6 check, and then if bishop at f7, there's a number of approaches. You could just keep dropping the knights to attack e6, or you could play bishop takes e6, trade the bishop this way. Alright, so we see pawn at f7, keeping the bishop for a possible counter-attack on f3, but it's a bit slow at the moment. Another idea is to put something on c8 and try and promote this way. although it doesn't really get into the square e6. It's a bit slow to get in that way. Okay, so this is a completely different idea to get in via the square g7. You typically respond by playing bishop at f6, and then you're at least holding up all the pawn drops on h6 and f6 after the trade. So Marlon is affirming this in the game chat, bishop at f6. I'm not sure whose team Marlon is on. There we go. So you don't have to be in a hurry to trade on g7. There are other options like bishop at e5. I think this would be my choice because the aim is to... yeah, there's a delay Zveta, so from my perspective, my commentary came before your message in the game, in the Twitch chat. But yeah, so the idea is so the pawn will take away, deprive the black bishop of this square f6 in the future. And then, like I said all along after white castles, I think white has an overwhelming advantage. And the idea of putting something on c8 is to try and make black waste the queen on d8, and then you try and crash through via one of these other options. So perhaps the idea of Legion's queen sack was he saw that he was winning a pawn back, but you can see how safe the white king is, and the main thing is that white is getting in first with all these extra minor pieces. So he's gone knight g6. What does that do? Clears the square e7 for the king. So many good moves. So many good moves. What about just dropping a bishop here? No? Aim to flag him, says Legion. Yeah, good luck with that. So, got so many knights. Do you just go knight h5 and keep the two in hand? And then that helps to control the squares here. Probably up to the stage where we can just keep checking until mate, but no. We see a non-checking move instead. I don't really think it matters too much. Bishop at g5. And sometimes in positions like this you play h6 to clear another square, but in this case even that wasn't good enough with knight at h5 and knight at f6 coming. So h5 takes the h5 square away, or at least allows the rook to defend. But now again, just so many good moves. Bishop takes h5, there's pawn at g7, knight at f8 coming. Yeah, I mean white has to be careful if he wants to trade here, because then you've got to watch out for queen sacks and knight at h3, stuff like this. Alright, so white to play. What's the most clinical finish, guys? G takes. Wasn't expecting that. I was expecting pawn at g7 or something. Alright, so Legion still has some sort of practical chance, because these bishops are getting in the way of all the knight checks. This move isn't helping. It's just gaining time by drawing the knight backwards, but white now has to defend. So exMOHAX has really messed this up. These bishops are taking all the wrong squares. Knight at f4. I think black is just going to take this. Haha, I should play Lotto after the game, says Legion. Thank you, Samuel M. Samuel. Knight takes f4, knight at h3, and it's game over. Oh, because there was e takes f3 check coming as well. Alright, way too many pieces in hand for black. So yeah, I was expecting something like pawn at g7, rook g8, knight takes g6, and then, only then knight at f8 check. So then one of the rooks has to sack, you take with a knight promotion, rook takes, you have a rook in hand for g7 or h6, and mate should follow. Sammy, he says. Sammy, welcome Sammy. Alright, Legion has 1-0 up in only a 2-game mini-match as part of the Crazyhouse Team League. So if you have just joined, this is not part of the Crazyhouse World Championship. That was the previous match between Jun Nakamura. At least I can do something to change the title. One moment. So we have LegionDestroyer versus exMOHAX, all capitals. There we go. Yeah, is that better? Alright, thanks Mayor Pal, for the follow. Now, Katask and some other players seem to play, maybe it was Oppa too, seem to play bishop takes f6 after both h6 and g6. Now that's too subtle for my clunky brain to understand why you delay bishop takes f6. I guess one idea is to slightly weaken the light squares and provoke h6, and then yeah, knight on f4 or e5 puts a little bit more pressure on these light squares, but it's a very subtle point. Because if you have another knight in hand after the trade here, then if the knight's on f4, and sometimes you can imagine a pawn on f6, sometimes you can play maneuvers like knight at f4 and then knight h4 and then stick the knight on g6. Bishop d3 also helps. Right, so what do we have instead? A trade here, queen e8, rook b1, rook b8, and black to play. So I never quite understand why black really wants to play queen e8. I guess only if he has to, because it's such a passive piece at the moment, this queen on e8. Just defending 2 pawns. Yeah, I suppose you could say the same about the rook on b1. So black to play. What's the idea? You don't really want to move any of these pawns here. It leaves too many holes behind. So possibly knight at g4, and then you got to do something with the bishop on c8. Knight at f5 instead. Alright, but why does he want to trade this? Knight takes, and then with the bishop in hand, what do you do? Because at some moment you'd expect with the knight on h4 to take on g6 and then start dropping stuff on f7. But this seems pretty safe from Legion bishop g3, and you see he hasn't committed to castling yet because he wants to take back with the h-pawn if there's any trade. Yeah, HG. There's somebody in the game chat called HGGGG. Alright, black to play. Again, another one of these positions where you really got to struggle to find a good move. Is the king better placed on h8 or h7, or is it just more vulnerable? Is the bishop better placed on e6, or is it a waste of time? Is everything a waste of time? What is a useful move? h5, h4 perhaps? I don't know. I really don't know what I would do for black here. Pass the ball over to the opponent, see what he wants to do. I mean, is it so bad if white plays hg? Because h6 is not a real weakness with no bishops on c1 bearing down against the pawn. So perhaps you could trade and then stick the bishop on g4. But okay, it can't hurt to play bishop e6. That's the way to pass the move to the opponent. Castle. Feels very much like a chess game at the moment. But as some people like to say, it doesn't really what the opening is. Crazyhouse always gets crazy in the end. We'll see a time scramble or a flourish of tactics. Sacrifices to open up the opponent's king. It's just a matter of time. Do they know they can capture pieces, says Blunderman. Yeah. Alright, bishop at g4. I was expecting something like this. So you see exMOHAX has waited for castling before trading on g3 and then bishop at g4. I would certainly avoid this trade bringing the other bishop to g4. And if he wants to trade something, probably better to divert the bishop away from this pin on the knight on f3. Alright, we see some action, finally. Knight takes f2. So I guess the idea is a mundane one, just to win a piece back on f3. So we're going to go back to plain old vanilla material equality after ef3, bishop f3, bishop f3. Probably g takes f3, and then can always drop a diagonal piece back on g2 if you really need to. So Legion's looking for better than just bishop e2. He's got knight takes e6. And the most active move is f takes e7, but then opens the f file. It does allow moves like bishop at d7. Not sure how that turns out. Yeah, potentially there could be devious moves like knight g5. I'm not sure. Anyway, that didn't happen, so knight takes, bishop takes, knight at f4. Looks very much like it did a moment ago. One possible idea is knight e takes g6 and then knight takes e6. So picking up an extra pawn. So if black has a choice, which he does, which piece does he want? I'd rather not allow this bishop to stare down on this diagonal here next to the king. So black has taken the bishop, and then there's no compulsion to take this back immediately. Perhaps Legion is considering the captures on e6 and g6. I think the safest move is c takes d3, with options of taking on e6 or g6 later. So this is not the way that seemingly wins a pawn, but there is bishop d7 to watch out for. And then we're probably going to see some sort of a queen sacrifice from exMOHAX, and the attempt to make a counter-attack, something like knight at e4 would be good. Because it still takes white a little bit of time, even after bishop takes e8. And then does he have a checking sequence on the next move with bishop at f7? Yeah, there's no safe place for the king, so that's why queen takes first and not allowing the bishops on this diagonal here to survive. And the knight is not immediately doing anything to pressure, so yeah, the main idea, the fastest attacking idea, is knight takes f2 and then rook at h1 and knight at g4, e4 mates. So Legion is going to have to defend. And yeah, I was going to say, I wouldn't allow something to land on e2 like a knight. It's not even so much of a problem that you lose the queen. The problem is the pawn lands on e2 and then threatening e takes f1 check. Whereas if we ever see this trade here, the bishop keeps the king very, very safe. And then you don't even have to sack the queen after knight at e2. You just sidestep with the king, and the bishop also covers the knight takes g3 check. So any other ways in for black? It looks totally crazy to sack the rook and then you only have a check, but you need a rook. You can pick up a rook possibly if the king steps this way, but then bishop takes f2 opens up the first rank to defend. So I really don't know where all this is going. Although on the other hand, like I said before, it does take Legion a number of moves to get in here. He may want to do something like knight g5 and then try and take back with the queen. Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced about knight at e2 allowing rook takes f2 if the king runs this way. So queen at h4 instead. I'm just covering the h file in case the king wants to run back this way, and possibly setting up some sort of vague threats, which I don't really see yet, but there is obviously a knight check if the king steps to h7. So bishop at e2. Now, without a knight in hand, it is certainly possible to sack the queen and then cover all. Maybe c takes d3. Oh, but then, hang on, there's a rook takes b2 check. It's easily blocked. Thanks, Luca. I guess it's Luca Schacht. Yeah, so Legion's got to make a big decision. If sacking the queen works, how to sack the queen. Do you take this? Do you take this? Do you take this? Or whether to move the queen, because he's committed to dropping the queen on h4, so he can't set up an instant mate threat via any sort of knight at g5. Not that it works anyway now with the rook pinning the knight here. So yeah, it's an important decision to make. Does he move the queen to a secure square like h1 and then... I'm still not really sure what he's doing on h6 after bishop takes f3. Looks like black is in control. So does that force him to sack the queen somehow? One of these three options. Is there another option of going totally crazy and with queen takes e7? But then at the very least rook at f7 should just be winning for black, unless there's some tricky knight at f6 check that I'm missing. But I'm not even sure there's a threat with queen takes e7 after this. Alright, so I'm guessing Legion is going to sack the queen. It's only a matter of how. Because if he goes queen takes e2, the main threat it seems is rook at f1 and then sticking the rook back somewhere, trying to make Legion block a knight, take a knight and then use that somehow in a sequence of checks to mate with the keeping the queen for last. Can he take this and take this? Black has a lot of diagonals. But then it's possible to use the pawn to block on d3. Can black do anything with a rook sack in that case? These are all things Legion would have to consider. So yeah, I'm really not sure what the best move is here for Legion. The other totally crazy move is to play something like knight at f6 just to block out the f file. But that might be giving up too much material with moves like knight at e4 check to follow. So he's gone queen takes e7. The safest move is probably rook at f7, but black still has to calculate if there's some queen sack and an eventual mate on h7 after knight at f6 check. And also what's happening on just bishop takes queen. Or is the idea pawn at h7 if king takes knight at f6, king h8, queen takes rook, and then rook at h7. So perhaps there is a sneaky threat to play pawn at h7, king h8. Then what? Does the sack work? Rook takes, rook at g8. Rook takes, pawn takes, king takes. What does he have? A couple of rooks. Probably enough to mate. And is there a mate after rook at f7? So I don't think pawn at h7 works so well in that case. What about knight at f6? Bishop takes. Knight takes. King g7? Does that prevent all the queen sacks? Scary stuff. So Legion has found pawn at h7, just like I was saying before. But I think queen takes rook wins. That's what I thought at first. And then rook at g8. Let's see if Legion agrees. Rook at g8. There is still an option to take on h7, but then everything is coming with check. Knight takes rook check. King takes g8. That seems to be the critical line. King takes g8 next. So this match is going to be decided in the next 30 seconds, most likely. Legion has the option to sack the rook this way, but then I don't think the bishop and knights are enough, so he's got to take a rook with check, remove that defender. I think king takes is more likely to survive. That's it. Now it's either knight at e7 or something I can't see. So knight at e7 check. Somehow I thought Legion had two rooks in here, but he's only got one. So king f7. Come on, x. Knight at e5. Don't take that. Just take one of the knights. Oh, but this knight takes g6. Save the knight. Maybe it didn't matter because the other knight was coming back anyway. We get the same position. Well, similar enough. But is he safe? Oh, hang on. Is this some sort of a crazy draw after rook at h8 and knight f8? But now he can go king g8. Or is this some sort of a crazy draw after rook at h8, bishop takes queen? Oh no, but then king g8. That wasn't a draw. Alright, I'm lost. Maybe black is winning after all. Marlonka saying, did black not miss queen at e2? Weren't the last 10 moves in a row all checks? Seems like it to me. Oh, Legion is defending rook at f1. Surely this is... There'll be some sort of a sequence here. Sack the rook here, drop the pawns on the light squares. Alright, this is mate for black. So, the scoreline should be 1-1, although I think it was the last game where I was saying exMOHAX was totally winning and then botched it up, so I hope I don't jinx him again, because he really should win this one, even more than the last game. Very safe on g7 if bishop at f7 check. But what is he threatening? That's the main question. What is he threatening? Probably it's enough to mate. Bishop here is a good move because he might need this square h3. Yeah, after knight f2 check. Yeah, I still don't quite see a forced mate. But now, was there any need for black to give so much material? Yeah, Legion's got it. So sadly, just in the time scramble, exMOHAX has spoiled it. Alright, so let's come back to the key moment, because it might not have been so clear after all. Alright, so knight at h3, king h1. I'm just trying to find the clearest win for black. So, with 3 heavy pieces in hand, it's almost certain that something at g1 is going to mate. But let's have a look. Rook at g1. If rook takes, then... Oh, hang on. It's not so clear after all, is it? I was about to say knight f2, but you still... hang on. Alright. Slow down. If white has nothing in hand, because the move in the game was rook takes g2, if you don't see a check, you'd pick up another knight on f8, because then there's so many ideas that work now, like knight at f2. Not only that, but if you distract the rook, then there's knight at f2 and knight at g4 check when the king is here. So trading a knight also helps because you can put it back on f2. So picking up a knight looks like a very clear way to win from this position. If the knight ever takes on g1, at first I was thinking you could... Well, obviously if you have another knight in hand, you could play knight at f2, but then king h2. So picking up a knight, maybe the only threat is to play knight at f2, but it's a strong threat. I mean, it's also very hard to defend, because it seems like white will have to play a move like knight g4. Luke is asking, are there queen at h5? Yeah, I mean, if your opponent has no pieces in hand, you either pick up a knight here, or you don't have to do something that's immediately forcing, especially if it trades material, or sacking a rook is not really what I would like to do here. Yeah, so queen at h5 is certainly an idea, and threaten all kinds of discovered checks, and that would have to be blocked with one of the knights coming to h. So Blunderman is saying something at g1. Let's say rook at g1, knight takes g1. Do you mean rook at h? Do you mean rook at h2? King. So HG is saying, is that really a pawn? No, there's 4 knights. There's one. Oh, hang on. Maybe it is a pawn. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just trying to find... Yeah, move 36. Yeah, and those knights didn't make another move, so... Yeah, that's a good point. It is a pawn. And that doesn't help at all. So, okay, let's forget about that. So Blunderman was saying rook at h1. Does he mean rook at h2 and then rook takes g2? But does this lead to mate? So you still have 2 queens. It's hard to believe it doesn't mate, but let's have a closer look. You still have this knight on h3. Yeah, so Blunderman's still talking about knight at f2, but we've discovered now that it was a pawn. So if you take this, you only get a pawn, not a knight in hand. Yeah, so I'm still trying to decide if rook at g1, knight takes... But perhaps it's a moot point if the rook can take, and then there's no mate after knight f2. And if you have to sack the rook, queen at h5, yeah, something can land here on h4. And then the knight covers g4. So, alright, well let's have a look after rook takes g2, because that was not necessarily the critical moment in the game. My first thought was just rook takes g2. So is this knight at h3 move necessary? Now, of course, if you take, then you get this pawn ladder that I was... hang on, the knight covers g4. Alright, so it's not so clear after all again. King takes, pawn at h3. King takes h3, and you have every piece on the board. But you don't have this pawn ladder because the knight is covering g4. Alright, so can you just sack lots of stuff and start with queen at h5, rook at h4 because you've sacked the rook on g2? But then if you drop the pawn and knight takes, queen takes can be answered by rook takes. And then all I'm looking for is a forcing sequence of moves, which is all checks. But I don't see it. So you could also insert this move, bishop takes f3 check. And one idea is to divert this knight away, and then you can drop the pawns here. So that means that the rook would have to take, or the king, I'm assuming that's an easy mate somehow. Queen at e4, queen at g2. So if the rook is on f3, it also means this rook is covering the first rank. And white has a rook in hand, so this check can be blocked with rook at f2. But you have an extra knight for knight at g5. Yeah, so if there's a rook on f3, then the king is going to end up on h3, knight at g5, and that, yeah, two queens should mate on h3 and g2. So rook takes g2. The other move is king h1. And then, we haven't sacked the rook, so just queen at h3 is mating. Yeah, so rook takes g2. Okay, I'm going to guess without looking at the engine. This is like mate in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I only guess it's mate in 7. Shall we have a look? I guess it's mate in 7. Haha, mate in 7. Look at that. Rook takes g2, king takes, bishop takes f3, rook takes. Ah, there was a faster mate with bishop at h1. Alright, I missed that one. So the idea is drop the rook and then the knight on e4 and the queen on... Oh no, the queen on e2 is faster, yeah, queen on e2 and then queen on g2. Alright, so it wasn't really a mate in 7, it was a mate in 5 with bishop at h1. I wonder if anyone would actually play that in a game. But yeah, the one I saw was this, bishop takes, rook takes, pawn at h3, king takes, knight at g5, and mate on e2 in the end. Yeah, just like this. So, my brain's about burst already. I don't know what Legion was talking about. He says he forgot about king h8, queen takes f8. I'm just trying to find the moment in the game where he was talking about this. King h8. Oh, he was just talking about this whole idea with pawn at h7. Queen takes, rook takes. Yeah, I'm not actually sure what he means. Rook at h7, rook h7 mate. But it seems like he did just about everything he could in the attack. Maybe it just wasn't enough. King f7, knight at e5. King takes f8. Is there a better way to do it here? Knight takes g6 check. I wonder if it makes a difference using the other knight. Just depriving the king of this escape route. But the king can go over to e8 in this case. I can make the moves on the board now. King e8, pawn and rook in hand. Can you do anything? Yeah, I don't know. Pawn at f7, king takes, knight e5, king e8. I'm just hoping. I don't think this is enough though. Rook takes, king takes, knight takes, king c8. Oh, but then you have bishop at a6 and pawn at d7. I don't know, this is certainly not a definitive analysis. Could even drop the knight on d8 here. King f6. Rook at f7, king g5. Is the king safe on g5? No, but then you also have to consider knight g8. King g5. And I don't see anything. Yeah, any knight move, you just pick up all the knights. What else? And there's also knight takes d5 check to consider to pick up another pawn. Let's say e takes, but then does the pawn even help if the king is here? Yeah, it does. Oh, rook f5 first and then knight f4 to mate. So the pawn does help in that line. If the king goes this way, then there's a knight f4 and pawn at c5. So knight takes d5. King g5. Pawn at h4 again. And knight f4. Alright, I think I'm just making up the moves. I'm not sure whether this is a real attempt, a winning attempt. King d7 we've also got to consider. Knight f e5. I don't really think taking is such a good idea, but then everything else seems to lose with rook at e8. So pawn at f7, is it a win? So maybe after all it did make a difference which knight to take. I mean, I'm only looking at king e8. There's also king f7, but then it's probably a mate after knight f e5 check. Yeah, that is mate by assumption, I have to say. So anyway, that's my conclusion, that knight 5 g6 makes a difference, but again, I have no idea. Let's check it out just for fun. Knight 5 takes g6 is apparently a draw. Okay, why is that a draw? Let's see what's wrong with my line. Oh, now it's changing its mind. Yeah, we got up to here. Okay, it's a mate in 12. I didn't know it was that long. Bishop takes, knight takes, king takes, rook at d7. And bishop at g6 is a key move to make some room, and then... Alright, we get this long sequence where you pick up another pawn. I'm not going to go any further. Okay, but I really just, before I finish, I want to see this mate in 5, because let's turn the engine off for a second. I didn't see a mate in 5 after this. So it's a mate in 4 from here. Oh, I'm going to need some help with this one. So mate in 4 from here. So the knight just came from e7, but you have an extra pawn in hand, so can you come back this way and then do something? Oh yeah, so rook here, king here, pawn here, and knight 7 takes c6. Was that it? So that was 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so it was the old switchback with knight back to e7. And then we got the pawn and the rook to finish if the king goes anywhere to the h-file. That way, yeah, that way. So yeah, looks like knight e7 is mating. But in the game pawn at f7, the obvious move was played, and then Legion realized, he's got a check, but then that's about it. And then, yeah, black really should be winning after this. Okay, now this says mate in 3. Don't quite get how this is a mate in 3. Unless it's one of these ridiculous moves. Oh, is it knight at h3 here? And then, oh yeah, queen at e2. So knight at h3 was made in 3. Instead of rook at e2 check. Yeah, so like we saw before, it's still a mate with rook takes g2. The faster mate was... oh no, that was it, rook takes g2. Alright, so a really fascinating game with all these knights and promotion to a knight. Seems like all this works for Legion. And okay, mate in 14, I'm not going to bother. You can look at that if you're interested, but I'm not going to bother finding a mate in 14 starting with rook takes f3 check. But yeah, so I mean, computers can be wrong if it's a long line, but it is saying black has the advantage after this bishop e2 move, and I was really struggling in the commentary to find a good way to proceed for Legion. Yeah, and I thought he might try this queen takes e7 with some nasty threats. But yeah, very exciting games. I will take a break. And what's coming up? So I have a match against King Switcher for fun and some bonus cash in about 13 hours from now. I will just show you the page of upcoming matches, which is right about here. So we just had Anjo Nakamura versus Master 10. The scoreline was 6 games to 1 in favor of Master 10, who qualifies for the candidates of the Crazyhouse World Championship. So that's in blue. You see that's the Crazyhouse World Championship matches in blue. And this morning in the early hours of Sydney time, Chicken defeated Finisher 7 games to 5 in a tie-break. It was not for any qualification, doesn't count for anything in terms of points, just for a bonus bit of cash and to say that you've been undefeated in the winners bracket. So we have some Team League matches coming up early Sunday Sydney time, which is afternoon UTC. And King Switcher versus Mugwort midday Sydney time on Sunday. And this is the biggest match of the week, Bugzilla and Clearcast. So only one of these two players will qualify for the candidates of the Crazyhouse World Championship, Monday 10 PM Sydney time. And I am hoping to do a double stream with John Lee, so we're both streaming and having each other in the voice call. But we'll see how his situation is with the baby. I don't know what stage you call it, a toddler. It's Spencer's 1 year old. Okay, so take a break from here, and very exciting games. Congratulations, Master 10, and LegionDestroyer should go buy some lottery tickets after those 2 games. Alright, have a good weekend. See you soon.